Okay, so we're going to use this boroscope to look down the main oil supply, which comes from the oil filter. This is after the oil cooler. That's where the oil comes in, and it goes through the oil cooler, and then it goes through this main oil gallery, which goes laterally across the front of the engine through the head. This is in the cylinder head, and this is the only place where oil goes into the engine from the oil filter. So we can go in here and we can see there's a cavity below which goes down to the main oil gallery on the longitudinally down the block on the left hand side of the engine. There it is. And then there's a recess above which goes to the Vanos solenoid. Then there's one going down which is blocked off, I think. And then there's one going down to the right side of the engine. And then finally, all the way at the back, is a hole which goes to the hydraulic chain tensioner. So we're going to try this again with a right angle mirror. We're going to go in and should be able to see down. Now I can see down into the block. So there you can see the Hylamar sealer oozing out a little bit, but not obstructing the hole in any way. That's the first hole which goes down into the block. And there's a second hole which is actually cut off. Then I think that hole's also cut off. And then we go down to the right side of the engine where we see down to the feed to the main oil gallery down the right side. And we can turn this a bit. We get right to the end. I don't think you can see any further. Okay. I'm going to turn this upside down. Maybe we can look up. So that goes to the, we're looking up now. This one goes to the left camshaft, I think. That goes to the Vanos, maybe the right camshaft. I don't know how far down we are. I think this is the right camshaft. Or the Vanos. There's two Vanos ports and there's two ports for lubricating the camshaft, I think. And then I think this is right at the end where it goes to the hydraulic tensioner. It doesn't seem to go any further after that. So there we go. So we'll just look closely at the oil filter housing and cooler. So if you look, this mates up right on over there. Now, these two are mirror images of each other, obviously. So what we have here is that oil enters through this one-way valve here. And there's a one-way valve here for a very good reason, because when you remove your oil filter, you don't want this oil to drain back down. You want this filled with oil all the time, so that it doesn't take too long for the oil system to fill up after an oil change. The oil then gets forced through the oil filter, and then it comes out here. And this area does not have a port back to the engine. It then goes through the oil cooler, and it comes out here, and then it goes into the engine. So this area here feeds that hole which we just put the boroscope into. So it's the top hole. So that's the oil going into the engine, and this is it coming out from the oil pump. And the question is, what does this hole do? And let's explain this hole, because it's quite interesting. That hole just drains back into the oil pan. And that hole is this area over here. So what is the point of that draining back into the oil pan? Well, if you look at this green O-ring over there, that green O-ring closes off that hole. Well, it closes off something which leads to that hole. So that what happens is when you unscrew the oil filter, that O-ring pulls out and allows oil to drain back into the pan. And the reason for this design is you want all this oil to drain out of the oil filter whenever you remove the oil filter. Otherwise, you're going to remove the oil filter and you get oil all over yourself. And it also allows no unfiltered oil to get behind the oil filter, because it will drain immediately out. So that's a clever trick. And you have to have that O-ring in, but that O-ring actually doesn't feed anything. I mean, that hole doesn't feed anything. It just drains back into the oil pan. If you don't put the O-ring in, then you get no oil pressure, because all the oil gets pumped straight out into the oil pan. So an important trick which no one seems to know is that when you replace your oil, after you've got your new oil filter and before you put your new oil filter back in, you should fill that bottom recess with Vaseline down in there. And once it's full with Vaseline, then you fill this whole cavity up with oil. You take 2 cups of oil and you fill it all right up. And then you dip your oil filter into that. And that way, when your engine starts, it's got the maximum amount of oil and the least amount of air in the system. No one's ever pointed this out as far as I know. But this is a very important trick. Okay, well that should explain a little bit about the oil feed system on the N55. Thanks for watching.